Now let me ask you a more serious question. Seriously. Why are you here today? Why do you come to church on a regular basis? Why do you come here? Whether it's a 9 o'clock service, 11 o'clock, or evening service, or whatever. Why are you here today? What is your number one purpose and reason for being here? I hope that you're able to say, to worship God. That's our number one reason. And I hope that we're here for other things. I like getting hugs and giving hugs and laughing and talking to people and fellowshipping. But that's secondary, or third or fourth or fifth. But our number one reason for being here is to worship God. And if that's not our number one reason, then maybe we need to back up and regroup to see why we're really here. I have entitled my message today, The Person Down the Road. We're going to be looking at the Gospel of Matthew, the 24th chapter. We'll see that here on the screen here in a few minutes. But let me say something about Jesus as he is speaking here. I really believe that Jesus is undoubtedly one of the greatest, if not the greatest storyteller and communicator the world has ever known. He has such an uncanny way of communicating great spiritual truths and insights, particularly when he's speaking about the kingdom of God. And he did so by using everyday items. It was situations and circumstances, sort of like me in the children's object lesson. And it was things that people could relate to. And he taught in parable form. He used a lot of parables. But in those parables, I would see the listeners and just imagining them trying to see themselves as to where they were in that particular parable. Where are they? Well, I want you to do that today also. As I told you, I have entitled this, The Person Down the Road. You know, contrary to what some of you all might think, I do a lot of thinking. When I'm by myself and I don't have my phone on, and I don't have the radio or TV or anything, I'm just me and God. I think about a lot of things. And this has been one of those weeks that I've pondered about some things and over some things. My memory always takes me back, when I think about my early years, to Hopewell Baptist Church, Springfield, Tennessee. Big part of my heart will always be at Hopewell. If I'm in the Springfield area, I love just driving by and sometimes just sitting there in the parking lot, thinking about days gone by, walking through the cemetery, seeing who some of the people that I once knew and played a big part in my life are no longer around. And some of them I didn't even know. Look at those stones. I didn't know they passed away. Don't have the connections there like I used to. But I can remember, and I shared with the 9 o'clock service. This really wasn't something I planned on doing, but it just came to me then and it's coming to me now. I can remember on that night, December the 10th, 1972, Hopewell Baptist Church. Brother Moore, Dr. Harry E. Moore, and I had eaten lunch that day with the McPherson family, who I worked for on the dairy farm. And I remember us taking a walk down the lane. I was at a point where I felt like the Lord was dealing with me in some ways and I needed to do something. I mean, I was Catholic. I was an altar boy. I was going through the motions. But there was still something missing in my life. And I knew that. And I was at that point in time as a senior in high school that I knew something wasn't there. So Dr. Moore and I walked down that road, and by that night, at the invitation, I walked down the aisle, shook hands with Brother Moore. Always loved Brother Moore, such a wonderful person. I remember the hymn that night was the invitation hymn, Out of My Bondage, Sorrow and Night. And I've told you that before. But one of these days, I'd just love to give you a trivia question with about 20 questions. Things that I've told you over the years repeatedly just to see if you remember it. and then give you pecan pie if you got them all right, okay? But what I remember more about that night, I think about this a lot, believe me, I do. I remember after leaving the church, going back home, and at that time I was living with the McPhersons, but I also lived in a little tenant house on the farm at 16 years old. But I was with them at that point in time, and I remember Frosty, a Jersey cow. Now, we didn't have but 2 or 3 Jersey cows. They were all Holsteins. But Frosty was such a sweet, gentle-spirited, old cow, but so friendly. And I remember making the most important decision of my life, laying down there on Frosty's head, looking at the sky, looking at the stars, thinking about my life and where my life was going to take me. Now, at that point in time, I never thought that I would be a preacher. I think I knew God's hand was upon my life. But if I remember correctly, I was still at that point in time where I could not stand up in front of anybody and talk. In case you don't know, that's changed, okay? But I can remember, we called Frosty Frosty because when she was a little calf, she got her ear frostbit. And I think many times about laying down on her stomach there, or her shoulder one, and looking at the sky and the stars and the moon and just thinking about life. You see, I had no idea what was going to be down the road in my life 10 years down the road, or 20 years down the road, 50 years down the road. I really don't like telling you this, folks. I really don't like telling you this. But 50 years ago, I made a profession of faith. I know that really confuses you because I'm only 40-something. And I don't understand that math, okay? But somehow it adds up that way, okay? But looking down the road, I wondered back there in December of 1972 what life was going to be like. Didn't know anything about Owenton, Kentucky. Didn't know anything about Pleasant Ridge Baptist Church. Didn't know anything about all the places that God would have me and put me and use me all over the years. And I want you to think back 10 years down the road, 20, 30. Some of you can very easily go back 50 years. Some of you go back more than that. But was there a time in your life when you thought about, what's my life going to be like? Who am I? Who am I going to be 10 years from now? What's going to be my thinking process? What's going to be my attitude? Will I be happy in life? Will I want the best out of life? Or am I going to be bitter-spirited and trying to go for all the gusto and use everybody I can? Do you think about those things, or is that just my weird mind? So I think all of us, somewhere along the way, think about. I think about the people that God put in my life that helped develop me into being who I am today. Certainly the McPhersons, because they owned the dairy farm. And that was really a changing experience of my life in a lot of ways. Physically, certainly spiritually. I think about teachers that I've had in school and professors. I think about Ridgecrest and all the people that I've worked with there and the influence that they've had, and all the many thousands of others over the years. See, I believe that you and I are who we are today, right now, because of people, influences, and circumstances that have been a part of your life, and how we respond to those circumstances. So it made us who we are. And if you're a cheerful person, a happy person, and somebody that everybody just wants to be around, then you've probably been around those people that put you in it. But if you're grumpy and irritable and hard to get along and nobody wants to be around you, then maybe you had those kind of influences in your life that led you to that point. Well, I believe that every day, in every way, we are becoming more and more who we are. I'm talking about inwardly, inside. I came across the theme or the motto for a graduating class a few years ago. Wasn't even around here. But the theme captured my attention. Their theme was, live for today, dream for tomorrow, and learn from yesterday. Pretty good philosophy when you think about that. Live for today. We talked about worrying a few weeks ago, how we spend time worrying about tomorrow. Let's just worry about today, okay? Just live for today. Dream for tomorrow, even if tomorrow is 40, 50 years down the road. And then learn from yesterday. I could write volumes of books on the things I've learned from yesterday, from yesteryear. Now, we put those concepts into action. I think we can learn a lot about life and where we need to be. Becoming the person we are. You know, when I looked at my life way back there, and I see where I am now 50 years down the road, I see things I would have never seen or envisioned in my life. Now, I say all of that to say this. The thread that connects these three thoughts here, live for today, dream for tomorrow, learn from yesterday, is really the main theme of the gospel lesson that we're looking at today in Matthew. And I think the gospel lesson here in this particular portion of this chapter has to do about the role of human responsibility and the decisions that we make in life. The role of human responsibility and the decisions that we make in life. Let me read this, okay? He also who had received the 1 talent came forward. Now, I'll give you a little preface here because I'm not reading all of that beginning. There was a master that gave one servant 10 talents. For the second servant, he gave 5 talents. And then to the one, which we're looking at right now, he gave 1 talent. And he says, Master, I knew that you were a hard man, reaping where you had not sown and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid. So I went and I hid your talent. I buried it in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him and said, You wicked and slothful, that means lazy, servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and I gathered where I have scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent to him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he who has an abundance. But from this one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the darkness outside. In this place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then in that same chapter, he goes into the final judgment there. And I'll make reference to that. See, I believe that when we look at what we're looking at right here, this parable gives us some great insight into the nature of judgment. You know, for one servant, the master gave him how many talents? 10. And then for the second one, he got half of that. He got 5. And then there was the one servant that only had 1 talent and given to him. Now we see this in Mark's gospel, but in Matthew's gospel, which is where we're looking at today, I think he challenged us this in a different way. We're told here, in so many words, we've got to take off our rose-colored glasses. Not everything in life is going to be the way we want it. See, we are here challenged to realize the awful reality that not everybody is created equal. I mean, why is it that some people are born into desperate poverty while there's others born in affluence? And I get those kinds of questions all the time, from one end to the other, the flip side. Why? You know, I've taken a liking to Joe Burris with the Bengals, and just like what I've seen about him and heard from him. I like him. I don't have his phone number, and he doesn't have mine, but I like him. But, you know, I cannot get on a football field and be the quarterback that he is. I don't have that talent. I don't have that. And then that Oscar dude with UK, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, but he's 6'9", I think he's right at 255 pounds. I would have loved to play basketball like him. But God didn't give me that talent, height-wise or ability-wise, okay? So no, not all people are created equal. But I've told you this before. We're all given at least one talent, one gift, one resource. Now, you have to determine here whether you're the one with the one talent or the 5 or the 10 or the 20. And I know some people that are so gifted in so many ways. I don't worry about that. That doesn't bother me. What I need to be concerned about, am I using the gifts that God has given me to use for His glory? So this parable reminds us that on Judgment Day, we will not have the luxury of passing judgment on God. Rather, God will be passing judgment on us. We won't be discussing what kind of God really is. We'll be discussing what kind of servant we have been for the Master. Certainly we know that God demonstrated on Calvary's cross the love that He had for us, sending His only Son to die so that we might be able to live and to have life abundantly. But now the question here is, how are we going to respond to the cross? How are we going to respond to what God has given us through the gift of salvation? And I'm sure that Jesus knew that there were going to be men and women that would leave their nets and follow Him and still be tempted to just sit back and do nothing. That's where this servant was. All he did was bury the talent that he had. Didn't try to use that as a resource. See, I believe that this parable here is a very important lesson for the church as a whole, but it's a very important lesson for us as believers not to be lazy, not to be apathetic. How many lazy Christians or how many lazy, apathetic people do you know that have so many talents that God has given them, but they don't use any of them for God's glory? And in essence, what they're doing is just like they don't have it, because they've taken it and they've buried it. Can't be useful for anybody. See, I see the challenge here as a gate of opportunity being open for everyone when we give ourselves and give our lives in totality to God. But there is a widespread attitude, talking about laziness and being apathetic in the church. I see it all over the world. I see it everywhere. You probably see it in your workforce. You deal with people every day that are just lazy. Their get up and go has gotten up and went. It just ain't there. How many people do you hear say, I don't care? They have that apathetic attitude. I don't care. I don't care. Or nothing I can do about that. And because they think there's nothing they can do about it, they don't try to better a situation. They don't try to roll up their sleeves and get into it and say, let's do what I can do and do it hopefully for the glory of God. How many times have you heard the phrase, well done? How many times have you been able to tell that to maybe some of your employees, well done? You know, I really think a big part of who I am today and why I put so much into what I do is because it started way back there on the dairy farm. I go back there and it's just an old dilapidated building now. Even the big barn's not there now. But I think about those cows. I think about the interest that I took in that and naming every one of those cows and putting chains and a number around their tag and really putting every effort I had into that. And I can remember the McPhersons and others saying, wow, that's really good, Milkweed. You're doing great. And that motivated me to do better. I want to do. That's what taught me to do a job and do it right. My dad always emphasized that. But today I look around and I see such poor quality of workmanship. I just ordered something from my phone here, a little holster, several days ago, and it broke 2 days after I got it. I wasn't doing anything. First thing I thought of was poor workmanship. What about a lack of pride? People are just not taking pride in things that they do anymore. Or general disregard for doing the right thing. Sometimes I have to look at a situation. Well, what do I need to do here? And the answer comes back to me is you've got to do the right thing. Now, the right thing may not be the popular thing. The right thing may not be what everybody else, and I've made enemies because I've done the right thing. I've got people that are disappointed with me now because I would not do something they wanted me to do that was unlawful and unethical. Well, if I have to make enemies that way, then that's okay. I'm not going to justify what is wrong by doing something that is wrong. What about quality control? There's just something about being able to lay your head down at night and feel good about what you've done through the day and not having no sense of guilt or shame. God, I gave it my best. Thank you for your strength. Thank you for your leadership and your guidance there. Okay, getting back to this one servant. Why did he fail? Why was he not successful in what he was asked to do? Why was it that the master could not say, well done? Because he didn't do anything. He didn't even try to use that talent or that gift or that resource. Well, I want to, in fact, what I did was look at that pretty closely. And sometimes I'll read a passage 3 or 4 times, 5 or 6 times. Sometimes I get it on my phone and let it speak it to me. It talks. And just so I can think as they're talking. What is really happening here in this passage? And what's happening right here in this parable? Well, I think there's 3 things anyway that we can pull out. See, this servant right here, the one with the 1 talent, exercised the power of caution over the power of commitment. See, this parable is not about a vindictive God. In fact, it's quite the opposite. God had already given him something, but he didn't use it. The gift of 1 talent. Really, when you look at it and do some research on it, that gift of 1 talent was really a huge sum of money. It was enough to be shared. It was enough to be multiplied. It was enough to be spread all around. This servant who hid his treasure in the ground was a wealthy servant, but he used himself for the benefit of no one. Nobody benefited from it. This was why he was condemned by the master. He was caught in that cradle of opportunity and resources and did nothing but dig a hole in the ground and bury it. Came across this poem this week. There was a very cautious man who never laughed or played. He never risked, he never tried, he never sang or prayed. And when he passed away, his insurance was denied. For since he never really lived, they claimed He never died. But when I think about that, I think about our life and how we live. Do people know that we have been given a gift or a talent? We all have, but how are we using that? See, we have been given so much full potential. And we can't let the potential of what we can be crippled by being too cautious. Now, don't get me wrong. We need to be cautious. But what we don't see here in this servant is that he was committed. He lacked that commitment. Mark Twain, I heard this years ago. Mark Twain said, even if you're on the right track, you can get run over if you don't do anything. If you just sit there, you can be on the right track, but we can be run over, even if we're on the right track, if we just sit there and do nothing. And that's really what we see here with the servant. See, that one talent servant didn't invest himself. He didn't invest his resources, didn't invest that talent. And he inherited what he invested. Nothing. See, the tragedy of life is, it's not that it ends so soon. The tragedy of our life is we really wait too long to get going on with the right things in life. I've known plenty of people say, I'm 50, 60 years old. I've wasted my life. But they've come to a point where they realize they need to start doing something. So I'm hoping, I'm trusting that we are not one of those that fall into the category that we're just wasting our lives right now. Yes, we've got talents, we've got resources, but I'll go in and bury those. They're not going to help me or anybody else. That's the mindset of way too many people. See, I believe that Jesus is not looking for cautious Christians. He's looking for committed Christians. And I told the 9 o'clock service this morning, all 15 of them, that if there's anything this church needs, we need more committed Christians. Now, we've probably always been that way. Probably any church has. But over the years, I've seen people, there's been people that have died off, people unable to be here. I worry about people coming to the forefront now. And do they have talents? Or do they have a talent that God can use? And they're going to take that one and bear it because they're not going to use it for His glory and honor. See, when that judgment day comes, I think we're going to be held accountable for that, folks. Something that God gave us, and we wasted it. What could have been used for our good and for God's glory. Secondly, this servant buried the very resource that he had to work with. And he only had that one resource. That's really all he needed. What did he do with that one that he had? He took it and buried it. And I believe, trying to get into the servant's mind there, that he really thought his strategy was probably the right thing to do. But in reality, it wasn't. The master trusted him to do something with that. And he chose to do nothing. Folks, do not bury the very thing that God has given you, or things that God has given you in the way of gifts and talents and resources. Don't be like that servant and bury it and not use it. When we take that, even if it's just one, and we develop it in the right way, it can be used in a tremendous way. Every one of us is a precious child of God. I don't care who you are, where you are, what you may think about your life, or what your talents may be, or gifts may be, or not be. Every one of us is a precious child of God who has eternally loved us. And we have all been sought by God from the foundations of the earth. That's not something I made up, folks. That's scripture, okay? And then, thirdly and finally, this parable teaches me, I hope it teaches us, that the final outcome of our lives depend upon the obligations we use to honor our lives. I really couldn't come up with anything else to build that statement upon, except this illustration. J. Wallace Hamilton wrote a book many years ago entitled, What About Tomorrow? And in that story, he talks about a wealthy builder. Now, this builder called his top assistant manager. And he said, top assistant manager, I'm going to be away for a while. I'm going to be gone for several months. But while I'm gone, I want you to build my house. I want you to oversee the building of my house. You know what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. I want you to oversee it. He says, I'm going to be retiring here before too long, and I have wonderful plans. I have an excellent parcel of land over there by the lake, and I want you to oversee the building of that house. So this builder goes on a long journey for several months. But now the assistant manager said to himself, well, he lives in luxury. I've worked for him all these years. He's never really done anything for me. So I'm going to use every opportunity I can to cut corners on this house. That's what I'll do. So what did he do? He used less than qualified builders. He used inferior products in the building of that house. And he hired inferior workers. But when the house was completed, oh man, it looked beautiful. Well, it looked beautiful on the outside. But its deficiencies in material and workmanship would soon surface in due time. It was not a job that anybody could look at intimately and say, well done. Because as a whole, it wasn't. Well, several months later, the builder comes back off that long trip. And the assistant manager comes up to him and says, do you like the house I built for you? He said, yes, I love it. It looks nice. And he says, well, I got news for you. You've worked for me all these years. Just to show my appreciation, I'm going to give you this house. Wow. Well, see, that's what God has really done for us. Our bodies, our lives, is a house. And God wants us to put into our lives the things that really matter, the things that make a difference, the things that will last, not just through our lifetime, but through eternity. See, God really wants to be able to say to every one of us, well done. Well done, thy good and faithful servant. In this parable, I see a lot of opportunities that could have been used, but wasn't. I hope that what we're striving to do in our lives, in this house that we are building, I hope that we are seeking the truth, seeking to do what is right in accordance to God's will, being faithful in everything that we do, never giving up, and there's going to be times when we want to throw the towel in and give up, but loving people, treating them right, and loving God first and foremost. Okay, let me wind up with the question I started with. The man down the road, the woman down the road. I want you to take yourself back to the time when you made a commitment to Jesus Christ, when you became a Christian. Now, in saying that, I'm assuming that everybody here has done that. That may not be the case. Certainly may not be the case out there in the media world. But for the sake of what I'm trying to say here, go back to that time when you made that commitment, When you, in essence, sat down there beside Frosty, laid your head on her shoulder, and looked at the reality of life and what was to come? Are you where you wanted to be in life? Did you build that house, putting all the quality materials and doing the best that you could? Or did you try to cut corners every way? Only you can answer that. Let's pray.